is hopefully going to be the first in a series. This will be a recorded webinar. The title of this is At the Crossroads of Vulnerability and Risk. Today, I'm happy to be joined by Mike from ImagineX. I'm Josh Tesoro from Thirdera. I am the security and risk practice leader here at Thirdera. Thirdera is a newer ServiceNow partner. We were established early this year. We're the consolidation of 5 regional partners. And that consolidation, along with significant hiring this year, has brought us to be the largest ServiceNow only focused partner. So we are very happy to have you here today. And Mike, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Josh. Real excited to be here with you as well. And thanks everyone for making the time in your afternoon to join. Mike Ellerhorst, I'm the cybersecurity practice director for ImagineX Consulting. ImagineX, we're about a 6-year-old boutique cybersecurity focused consultancy. We're headquartered in Atlanta, but we have people across the United States and serve clients in all different markets and segments. Really as a company, our goal is to help our people, our clients, and our communities be better. And we do that through making sense of and helping our clients solve their cybersecurity challenges.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for being here. And, the topic today is very interesting. So we want to talk about why we're here and what this means, and maybe give us your rundown on the crossroads of vulnerability and risk.
Great. Thanks, Josh. Yeah. So, vulnerability management and risk management are 2 topics that, anybody in IT, anybody in information security are very well familiar with, and intersect or don't intersect or overlap, depending upon the people or the person that you're talking to. And so, when we were thinking about this conversation today, we felt like, let's talk about where is that intersection? What is that intersection? And from my perspective, that intersection in the crossroads really is at risk. The word risk. Some of what generates confusion, and in my opinion or my experience, is that the word risk means different things to different people.
Yep.
On the left-hand side here, right, more of the kind of risk management, the compliance lens. It's a discrete business or a discrete outcome with some usually negative consequences. And potentially from the other end, so depending upon the road you're coming to the crossroads, right, from an IT perspective or an security engineer, can be more of an approach, or a methodology to look at and tackle your IT operations. So, I like this visual, and I'm excited to hear your perspective and talk through where that intersection is.
Yeah, and this is very interesting to me because one of the things we run into, I think, pretty often is people are hyper focused on the bad outcomes that can be achieved, right? The risks in the business, and we see so much of this happening in the wild, right? We hear stuff in the news all the time. And we often have conversations with people where they're just super amped to get into something actionable from a risk perspective. And often we find organizations in their enthusiasm to level up, mixing these things together. And while there is tremendous overlap and synergy between the things we're doing in risk and the things we're doing in vulnerability response, in fact, they're dependent. It's really important to understand where the boundary is if we're going to be successful and kind of get to a mature place.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think, sometimes, right. Yeah, and to be very clear, for this conversation, right, vulnerability management and risk management are not the same thing. They are related, they're important to be understood, but they are definitely not the same thing.
Yep, absolutely. So, I guess starting off, let's maybe define them. So what is risk management? And this is kind of your expert space, right? Because you spend so much time helping, C-level leadership at organizations define risk programs. So I'd like to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah, thanks. So I pulled the definition here from the OCEG, the Open Group on Compliance and Ethics. And I like this because it's pretty broad, right? So the act of managing processes and resources to address risk while pursuing reward. So, with this definition, it makes it clear that it's not just an IT thing. It's not just a, corporate compliance thing, not a legal thing. It's something that is foundational to running a business.
Yep.
It's typically done by the executive teams, and some of this is it can be an intuitive and natural thing for some professionals. Some it's not quite as intuitive, but it's necessary as a company grows, to be more disciplined and thoughtful in the way that you're approaching risk. The other thing that we talked about, getting ready for this, is this concept of digital transformation. What we're seeing in the marketplace, what companies of every single size, industry going through. It brings the importance of IT risk management to the forefront, and increases the importance of understanding and the participation of lots of different stakeholder groups in that risk management process.
Yep.
And so the easy visual there on the right-hand side, the fairly simple life cycle, but it is absolutely a life cycle, going from identifying the risk, assessing it, what's the impact, what's in scope of it, deciding how to treat it. There's a lot of different ways to deal with risks. You can mitigate risks, you can transfer risks, you can avoid risks by not going into a market. You can accept risks. And then, monitoring is critically important, because no business is static. We all know the threat landscape is not static. And so, paying attention and being able to adapt and respond is also critically important.
Yep. And I think one of the things I've heard described, which kind of puts risk into like a business lens for me, right, is organizations are always trying to get a ranked way to figure out where to invest money to make money, right? And theoretically, risk management is the mechanism you're using to go across the organization and quantify all the things that could be bad outcomes. You get to rank those things and then decide how you're going to invest, right? Whatever that mitigation is going to be, to potentially make it less risky. So it's the strategic lens that an organization would put on mitigating potentially bad outcomes across the board.
Yeah, I like that. And one thing that you just brought up around quantifying, I think risk management sometimes can be a scary topic.
Yep.
And some boards, some executives, want to put a dollar value on risk. And there are ways to do that. There's the FAIR framework out there to do that, but it's also, one of the things I'd like to get across to, our audience and, the folks that have joined us today is, it doesn't have to be scary, right? It can be a fairly simple concept and can be adopted at, lots of every layer and every, phase of maturity.
Yep, absolutely. And I think it gets kind of scary because people, they look into actioning a risk program and they look at all the different methodologies and you can get really deep in the weeds. So, I think the way that we describe it, 10,000 foot level is, it's the mechanism you're using to go across the business and assess, as best you can, all the things that could be a negative outcome, and then prioritize those for attention. And one of the things that people get really excited about, because there is so much actionable stuff to go do, is vulnerability, right? One of the risks, and I'll leave it to you to kind of say this correctly, right? But one of the risks that we would try to mitigate is on the exploitability of our technology, right? So vulnerability response then becomes a way to mitigate that risk across the board.
Yeah, that's great. Let's dig in a little on vulnerability as a specific risk. So like you said, the exploitation of a vulnerability is something that everybody is concerned about and trying to take action on. Again, anchoring back to an industry and external definition. Call out here, a vulnerability is a weakness in an information system. Could be technical, right? A system security procedure could be process driven. Internal control, that could be people driven, or implementation that could be exploited by a threat source. So again, expanding a little bit this definition of what is a vulnerability and how to think about it. Putting some stuff on the slide here, a little bit of the classic, fear, uncertainty, and doubt that's common in almost every single cybersecurity conversation. But I don't think we need to belabor that. The 30 or so folks that have joined us today clearly feel it's important. It's important.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I want to say is interesting, right? Is organizations often approach the kind of organizational risk management and the vulnerability program separately from different ends, because the vulnerability program has very defined tactical things to go do that I can start doing now, which is really nice, right? Because I can get my hands dirty, I can feel like I'm making progress immediately. And risk management can be more ephemeral. And I think the important thing here is to recognize that while they are different processes, there's a relationship. We shouldn't be doing these things in silo, and we should be at the same time treating them a little bit separately, right?
Yeah, totally. And to that point as well, right? Getting very tactical with it. You think about PCI DSS compliance, right? One of the requirements is having a vulnerability program. And so it can turn into a bit of a checkbox exercise for some companies.
Yep, absolutely. And vulnerability, though, can, as we're going through the vulnerability process, it is really managed across the life cycle of that individual risk we mentioned. And I know that there's lots of things we're doing here if you want to kind of walk us through what this looks like.
Yeah, this is, really trying to make it a little bit more real from the top down. So I love the way you described, risk management as that strategic lens for decision making. And this is kind of the top down lens of trying to draw that the 4-step life cycle into what does it look like? What does it feel like? And putting some vulnerability management terms to it. So, from an identification perspective, these can come from lots of different areas. Vulnerabilities can be identified in many ways, whether it's via, your vulnerability scanning tools, whether it's alerts from external sources, whether it's, the passing of time with a certain, software or technology that you're using. And even internally, right? Application bugs. It's a flaw. It's a mistake in a developed piece of software. So again, broadening that thought, and then assessing it. What are the processes that are impacted by this vulnerability? Are there how important is that technology to the business function? Is it a server that's completely isolated, behind 5 layers of security defenses and nobody can, interactively log into it? Or is it something that's sitting on the edge of your network that, anybody on the internet can touch? A lot of that assessment piece is, then drives your risk treatment. Here's a handful of different, treatments that we kind of talked about, right? You can address the risks with the nice slashes through them, or the risks may persist. They may carry on either as is in the risk acceptance, or in a reduced capacity, through different mitigating controls. And then from a monitoring perspective, again, this looks in a lot of different ways. From a very tactical perspective, this can be the operational reporting coming out of the security team, presented to the infrastructure team, the platform teams. It can be the quarterly updates to the board. This is how we're monitoring and managing our risk. And from a documentation perspective, capturing and documenting risk acceptance is also critically important to business. And so maintaining the traceability of this exercise is an important piece to the risk monitoring.
Yep, and this is all the things we're doing in the life cycle of a single risk, which is mitigated or addressed with our vulnerability program.
Yep. Yeah.
And it feels like a lot, right? We had a customer recently that I think had like more than 9 million vulnerabilities, and then you look across kind of all the teams and all the things you have to do to organize all of that, and it feels really overwhelming.
Right. And it's an interesting, like, that 9 million stat, right? Like, when you think about it from the top down, from the board perspective, the risk of, business disruption due to the result of an exploited vulnerability, that may be a single risk on the company risk register.
Yep.
But underneath that, right, that ties to 9 million, vulnerabilities. So it's this, like that two lenses is, it's a really important distinction. I think I like that.
Yeah, agree. And I think one of the things we want to highlight here, right, is that processing a vulnerability is simple. And that's kind of sarcastic, right? I mean, when you're doing that at scale, it becomes very complex. But the things we're doing for an individual vulnerability, right, as we're tracking an individual thing through remediation, really shouldn't be that complex. And they do also follow the risk lifecycle. So as we're looking at what we're doing here, right, we've got sources, and Mike mentioned this a little bit earlier, for vulnerabilities from many different places. And those could be internal scanners looking at different types of vulnerability across different parts of the environment. Those could be, external sources. We could be looking at zero-day notifications, stuff from vendors, right? Lots of different things. And the hardest, or one of the things that seems to be the hardest part, right, is getting all of those in one place, getting all of those different sources aggregated into a single pipeline. Once we've done that, or we have a single vulnerability we're looking at, we need to figure out how we're going, how important is that? And just like we would in risk management, at a strategic level, at a tactical level for that individual vulnerability, is it risky enough to really warrant immediate attention above all the other things we're dealing with? And the thing that we've seen a lot recently is organizations, everyone's looking at the CVSS score of vulnerabilities. They're looking at what your scanner, your source is telling you, right, which is like the inherent risk score. But then there's lots of other really valuable things. And if I could bold company specific risk, I would, because that's all the things that Mike also mentioned earlier around, given this specific thing that is impacted, whether that's an application or an asset, where does it lie in my environment and how important is it to me? What kind of data does it have? Is it business critical? All that kind of stuff. And then finally, what's trending kind of at large in the world? Are people exploiting this? And putting all those things together, I mean, when you talk through it, it sounds really easy, but it is, doing that at scale across your entire program, can take some real thinking and planning.
Yeah, no, it is, I mean, it's a lot when you look at the words on the screen. One of the things that making sense of cybersecurity, we try to distill these, complex concepts and help them be understood by a lot of different audiences. I'm giving the full audience permission to use this analogy if you want going forward, but I use kind of the grandmother test, if you will. Like, can I explain this to my grandmother? And vulnerability management, talking about these different pieces, to me it's like, the example that I would use is it's updating your iPhone. So risk identification, it's the little red bubble that pops up on your settings that says a new version is out there. Risk assessment, in this case, it's probably not that detailed, but you could look at, what are the components of that version. Risk treatment, you can either update it or you don't update it. It's pretty straightforward. And then risk monitoring. For the most part, Apple's kind of doing that for you, but you have to pay attention to your little settings to see the next red bubble, and so like, it can be a pretty simple end-to-end process. Yeah, but it's super complex at scale.
Yeah, and the steps, if we were to look at them, just like, go find the vulnerability, figure out how important it is, figure out who's going to do something with it, and then report on it. That feels really simple, but you have to do some pretty, precise things tactically for this to work at a large scale, right, across 9 million vulnerabilities. Because realistically, we know that they're not all going to get fixed tomorrow. There's too many. So how do we look at this stuff in a way that is, that makes big groups of high priority vulnerabilities actionable together first? And then, how do we report back on our program health back to, that risk that we're attempting to mitigate? How do we show on the risk register what this looks like based on what we're doing?
Yeah. So Josh, what are some of the challenges that you think, we face or we've seen?
People have lots of challenges. Vulnerability response is really hard. And I think that's a good lead into a poll. So we want to know real quick, if you would, we've got some things that we've seen before. and this is anonymous, but if you could go in and pick the things that you think have been challenging in your vulnerability program, or that you've heard as a challenge in your grandmother's vulnerability program, that would be super helpful, and we can see kind of what came up as most important. And if you have something that is not listed here, and I know of a couple that are not, please post it in chat. We'll give it another 15 seconds here or so.
Josh, is that you in the picture there? Do you get a bonus shout out for marketing material?
No. I don't have cool enough glasses, unfortunately. There's a very high bar. Okay, so coming to the end here.
At least you and I do have the beard to
get
that, though.
we're in the same. We're like in the same class, I guess.
I like it.
So I got one in the chat that says poor. I think that's supposed to be CMDB quality. It's certainly a common one. So can we, Anna, can we put up? Oh, here we go. Perfect. Data overload is number one, and lack of good context.
No full view of assets. I think that ties to the C comment.
Yeah, I think also the lack of context or meaningful risk factors probably ties into CMDB, because a lot of the things that about ownership or business criticality, right? Those are things that would be coming up through the CMDB. So you get those risk factors there probably. The other one that I think, which I just kind of mentioned, is big, that's not on here, is we've run into organizations that don't have clear ownership of things defined. Yeah. And so you can do all the things to identify the vulnerabilities. You can sometimes do the things to contextualize them from a risk perspective, but then it's really hard to get next steps done because who's going to do them? Yeah. And or maybe there's a split across, whether it's an infrastructure vulnerability or an application vulnerability, and that kind of deciding that ownership is tough.
Or it impacts the consistency, right? Like if you don't have it clearly articulated and written down or codified within processes or a tool like ServiceNow, then if so and so is paying attention, awesome. You execute it really well. But if they're not, on point or around, then it can be inconsistent. It's a great one.
Yeah, and in the example we mentioned with the 9 million vulnerabilities, right? We were able to do all the good things we listed on the previous slide. We were doing those with the assistance of ServiceNow. We were able to get people down to about 2,000 things to go do today. And across 21 teams, that was a manageable number as compared to that initial 9 million number. So I think it's really important whether, obviously I'm a proponent of ServiceNow, and you have worked with different technologies as part of, your role. But I think the really important part is, planning ahead, right? It has to be a planned activity. It can be something we're doing as an afterthought. And we have to go in and, select the technology that's going to allow us to build the CMDB, to put these things together.
Yeah.
We have a question.
In that comment, I think that's great. Maybe we can touch on it if we want to spend a couple minutes, just go through some of these common challenges. And I'd love to hear how you've helped some companies address, and I can share some of my perspectives as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul had a question real quick, maybe we can hit. So he says, can you discuss how prioritized vulnerabilities are delivered to remediation teams in ServiceNow via vulnerability response? Are the workflows developed to allow for timely and focused remediation efforts? Yeah, absolutely. So ServiceNow, has a mechanism to ingest vulnerabilities from many sources. So anything in your environment that could be a source of vulnerability, we can put into ServiceNow. It relates the definition of a thing that is looked for, that is scanned for, to a specific asset in your environment, and pulls in contextual data that might be available via the CMDB. Helps prioritize and then automatically assign those things. So if I were doing an import into ServiceNow from a specific scanner, let's say Qualys, I could have that assigned to the team with prioritization and other data, basically instantly. So within 5 to 10 minutes of that import, so very quickly. And there are things then that can be done, we can document the things we're doing to remediate, and we can actually go and close that and see very quickly as a response back from the scanner, be a two-way communication if that thing is actually gone or if it's still out there. So there's some really cool stuff we can do there. And we'll put something up here in a little bit, but you can connect with Thirdera or ImagineX Consulting, or both of us, to kind of get more details on that. Happy to do a demo, all those types of things.
Yeah, and just to add on, Josh, I think, to me, one of the powers of ServiceNow, I think one of your colleagues used this term the other day. I really liked it. It's the platform of platforms.
Yep.
And so, a lot of companies have adopted ServiceNow as IT service management platform. So your application teams and your platform teams are used to interacting. And so, enabling and installing that vulnerability response module is an awesome way to piggyback on top of something that's comfortable or known, and really accelerate and effectively manage that prioritized burn down of risk, remediation of vulnerability.
And that addresses some of the challenges we have here, right? So you can, through the CMDB, get a full view of assets. You can use the CMDB as a repository to track many of your risk factors. And you can use some of the inbuilt features in ServiceNow to go, deal with the data, to parse it down, to make it actionable, make it consumable, and find those, few things to go do now. Some of the things aren't fixed, so no set or tracked expectations. I mean, that's an organizational challenge, Mike, that I'm sure that you've helped companies through in the past.
Yeah, absolutely, and it goes to the roles and responsibilities piece that you brought up earlier. Of if you don't know who's on first, it's a lot harder to track against expectations and report against them and hold people accountable for them. One of the big challenges that a lot of my customers have faced is even defining those expectations. What are the right SLAs? What's realistic? What can I stand behind if I'm presenting to my leadership team? Yep. What are my regulators going to agree with? Is it the 30, 60, 90 from a high, medium, low? Is it a 7, 10, 30? Yep. Is it a 7, 14, 30? In my experience, there's no one right answer, and it's, you have to go through the exercise of defining, understanding, and talking about what are the right expectations for you as a company.
Which is why vulnerability response can't be an afterthought. You have to plan for it.
Totally. Yeah. And on the the first couple, just from a recommendation perspective or advice that I'd share is it can be super complex. It can be super overwhelming. You don't have to start big, right? Start small, implement a process that you can execute, you can stand behind, you trust. If you don't know all of your assets, start with a set of assets that you know and that you can trust, and build from there. And maybe this is a future webinar that you and I can talk about, but this also gets to the point of asset management is separate from vulnerability management. They're intertwined, they're interdependent, but it's not the vulnerability management function to maintain that full view of assets. So just some pragmatic tips
and as you start talking about more of those things that are dependent, separate but related, that's where the ServiceNow kind of platform of platforms argument comes in, right? It does all those things, it relates them, you get the synergy and efficiency from having those things related, while also getting to kind of give each of those processes the focus they need.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So if we want to have further conversations, if you want to talk about kind of what this looks like, in the reality of your organization and the challenges you have, feel free to reach out. Between ImagineX and Thirdera, we have, tons and tons and tons of experience doing this with all different types of organizations. So look forward to hearing from everybody. Thanks, Mike, for joining us today and walking us through your perspective from the strategic side.
Absolutely, Josh. Appreciate the conversation. It was a good one. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you very much.